All right, welcome everyone. My name is James Serra. I'm a data and solution architect at Microsoft. I have been at Microsoft for the most part of the last 8 years, and I had a brief stint at EY, but I'm back at Microsoft now and Microsoft Consulting Services. There's my email, and if you have any questions after this, and my blog. And we're going to talk about data lakehouse, data mesh, and data fabric today. And there's all these buzzwords going out, and if you try to figure it out on your own, you may wind up pass out drunk in a Denny's. So I'm going to try to prevent that happening by quickly going through what all of these buzzwords mean. If we look at why we have a data warehouse, I'm assuming most of us know the reasons for a data warehouse. So I'm not going to go through all these other than touch on the big ones. You try to reduce stress on a production system by copying the data over to another area, whether that's a data warehouse or data lakehouse or any of the things I'm going to talk about. And you optimize it for read access on there, much different than OLTP application on that. So this is why we have a data warehouse. And we also, and this deck will be made available for everyone to go through this more. And okay, a data lakehouse. What is a data lakehouse? Why do we use one? This is where you put all your files that you're getting from your source systems into a landing zone. And you do this because of a lot of the reasons on here. One of them, just to think about, is that I can put this in a data lake and I can clean the data and then move it to a relational database. So you can think of a data lake as at very least this area for staging that you can do all your cleaning and avoid the contention with your relational database in there. So the majority of customers I see are, almost all of them really, are building data lakes. And the idea with most customers in the last number of years is you have both a data lake and a data warehouse. And to think about it at a high level, a data lake could be your staging and prep area. And then your data warehouse could be where you serve it and where you have security on that. And the reason for that is data warehouse can have more security than you could have in a data lake, like row-level security. It could handle a lot of concurrency. And so you can think of the data lake taking out that staging area of data warehouse and doing all the prepping inside of that. Also, because the data lake is schema on read, meaning I can land data in there and access it very quickly for technical skills. It could be used for those power users, data scientists, to access the data right away and not wait till it gets to the data warehouse. If we look at the modern data warehouse, and I apologize for my whiteboarding, I usually whiteboard this. Think of the modern data warehouse as 5 areas. You ingest the data, you store it someplace in this data lake, and the data lake can have many layers, and that's a whole topic in its own. But inside the data lake, you have a raw landing zone, and then you need to clean the data. So that's where the transforms comes into step 3. And in green here, you'll see some of the products you can use for that, like Azure Data Factory, Data Flows, or Databricks, or Synapse Serverless, and then you transform it and you put it into a clean layer, and then you can then do other things to it, aggregate it, join it, and have a presentation layer, even a sandbox layer of a copy of the data. And then from step 4 is you're going to model it, because it may not be conducive for end users to use the data sitting in the data lake because it's just file folders and that could be too complicated for them. And then you may want to copy it into model it into something like a Synapse, where it's a relational database. You may want to put it in a star schema instead of a third normal form. So step 5, to visualize it, the Power BI user on there can do self-service BI because it can be very easy for them to then create reports because of that, the work that's been done to get it into that star schema. If we look at what a data fabric is, I view it as a extension of what we typically call a modern data warehouse, where you're adding more features to it. Access features, data access policies, you have a lineage in there, you have master data management, you have some virtualization, you break it out into building blocks and products, you have APIs for accessing all the data. So this is my definition. I would say there's no common definition of what a data fabric is. I use it as a big enhancement to a typical modern data warehouse. If we look at a data lakehouse, over time, this is the history of what we've done with data. We had one monolithic data warehouse before, a relational database, like a Teradata and the Teza. Then we came up with the data lake concept, which is let's just put everything in a data lake, and it's this land of unicorns and rainbows, and everything comes out great. Well, that didn't work. And so we migrated into a combination of the two, like I just talked about, a relational database and a data lake. And now the data lake house concept brought about in popular by Databricks is let's go back to just using a data lake, but let's enhance the data lake using a technology called Delta Lake to make it more conducive to be in the be all end all in there, because we're going to add things like ACID transactions and be able to version it. And we're going to have schema enforcement, and we're going to make it faster, and we're going to allow streaming in there. And so all these things has made it where customers are now saying, you know what, I can get away with just using a data lake by having a Delta Lake, and which is a layer on top of it that gives it all these additional features. So the use cases for a data lakehouse are to solve some of the problems with keeping the data lake and the relational database in sync. It's the extra cost, and a couple is listed here. So that's where we see a lot of customers that are taking to this data lakehouse approach. However, there are concerns with skipping a relational database. The biggest one is the speed. If you need millisecond response time, or if you need things like low security, or some of these referential integrity, and just being used to relational database, this is why a lot of people struggle with not having a relational database as part of their solution in there. Now, the data mesh concept has come out, and the biggest difference between that is everything I talked about before was centralizing the data in one location, is copying it over. The data mesh concept is decentralizing it, meaning you don't have to collect all the data in one location. And so if we look at this, this gives us some of the benefits. Is I now can decide those areas outside are, we'll call them domains, and they're going to own the data. And the data mesh is, at least in theory, solves the problem of who owns the data. The domains keep the data, and they own the data. And that means there's less ETL because you're not centralizing it. You think of data as a product. You think of not having one location, IT, that's the bottleneck, because all those domains will have their own engineering teams, and they're the ones cleaning and making the data presentable on that. And so this is a much different approach than centralizing everything on here. And this allows you to scale, because you will have all these individual teams as domains are created. They're adding additional teams in there, and they're all taking care of the management of the data, the quality of the data on there. So it solves the quality issue. It defines who owns the data. It allows you to scale organizationally as well as technically because of those teams that are in each of those domains. However, there are concerns with the data mesh, and I have a lot of concerns with them. The way it works in theory has a lot of challenges. One is, if you ask 10 people what a data mesh is, you'll probably get 11 or 12 different answers in there. So we have this challenge of not defining what it is. And then also the big problem is it's huge investment in organizational change, because what happens is if you go out and tell those domains you're now responsible for cleaning and governing the data, a lot of companies, that's not going to fly. They don't want to have those responsibilities. They want IT to get a copy of the data and take care of everything. And they don't want to create their own team. So this is a big problem with the data mesh. And there's a lot of other ones here I won't go over. But what I'm starting to see now with customers is they are doing sort of a combination of things. They may centralize the data, and so they may have a modern data warehouse or a data fabric. But then there may be parts of their company that want to control the data and own the data. And so they become the data mesh. And so you have the central location of most of your data, but then a few domains that are controlling their data. And so you have this data warehouse or data fabric and a data mesh combination of that. And also what's changing is we are seeing more people look at using just a data lakehouse or data lake using Delta Lake because of features that are coming out of Synapse, especially with serverless. So you can use regular T-SQL over data sitting in a data lake and get very good performance. And it appears to the end user that they are using a relational database because you define this metadata over it. But in actuality, the data is sitting in a data lake. And so While I've always used to say you definitely need to have both a data lake and a relational database, that's changing in that I'm starting to see more use cases because the technology has gotten there with customers avoiding using a relational database and just using a data lake. And so that hits me at the top of my time on there. Again, if you have questions, feel free. There's my email. Just send me an email. My blog goes into more detail about some of the things I talked about today. So check that out. And happy to have any of those questions as a follow-on. And I'll make this deck available to the organizers so you'll have a copy.